Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to CHCI Summit Session on Latino Voices, American Journalism and Media. My name is Winta Menges, and I'm the Senior Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations at CHCI. As a media junkie who's really tired of hearing excuses about lack of diversity, I, like many of you, aspire to see more stories reflecting a range of beliefs and experiences that reflect the changing demographics in our country. I'm therefore honored to introduce this panel to you. Now, on behalf of CHCI, I would like to thank Viacom CBS, Nielsen, Walt Disney, and Warner Media for their generous support of this session. Before we begin our panel, I am pleased to introduce our panel host, Congressman Tony Cardenas. Congressman Cardenas sits on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, where he is fighting for hardworking families to lower prescription drug prices, protect consumers, and combat climate change. He has also worked on and authored legislation to ensure that everyone across the country has access to affordable, quality health care. It's an honor to have you join us, Congressman. Now, among other things, this session is going to celebrate Latino voices in American journalism and media and discuss ways that our newsrooms and media companies can encourage greater diversity on their staff and in their stories. To help us moderate this discussion, we are delighted to have a former CHCI alum and reporter for KTLA 5 News in Southern California, Carlos Saucedo. Carlos joined the station in March of 2019, where he has covered some of the biggest news events from Kobe Bryant's tragic death to the mass shooting that took the lives of 23 people in El Paso. Now, prior to making his return to his hometown, Carlos reported for KGO TV in San Francisco, where he covered some of the major stories in Northern California, including what became the state's deadliest and most destructive wildfire. Carlos also anchored the news and reported at stations in Sacramento and Fresno. He started his broadcasting career as a reporter and bureau chief for KWTX in Waco, Texas. During that time, he covered stories from Fort Hood, the largest U.S. military base in the world. Welcome, friends, and I hope you enjoy this session. And one last thing, please don't forget to continue the conversation on social media with the hashtag CHCIHHM20.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tony Cardenas, and I'm a United States Congressman. I represent the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, where I was born and raised, and also I'm very proud to say that I'm the son of Mexican immigrants. I'm honored to be a United States Congressman, and today I'm honored to be part of this forum, and I want to thank everybody for following CHCI and our conference, our CHCI 2020 Leadership Conference, virtually this year, and I want to thank everybody for following it and participating in it. You are what makes it successful. This is about leadership, this is about learning, this is about growing as a community, and also educating other people outside the Latino community about the beauty that is the Latino community in the United States of America. Today's panel is about our voices, this conference is Our Voices, Nuestro Poder. And this panel is about media. This is about Hollywood, this is about news, this is about why is it that we hardly see any Latinos when it comes to American journalism and media. I think it's really important for all of us to understand that we all play a part on making sure that we do make progress. But first and foremost, we need to hold every single corporation accountable, including the ones that are sponsoring this conference. Yes, I said that. We need to make sure that this is a relationship. This is a give and take. We are 60 million people strong in the United States of America. We are $2.3 trillion. That's with a T that comes out of hardworking Latinos' pockets every single year. And everybody needs to understand that we are part of this country, even though somebody with the biggest megaphone in the world might say that we don't belong. No, that's just not true. We are part of the infrastructure of America, and we are part of what makes this country so beautiful, so wonderful. And I also want to give a shout out to all the dreamers out there for being on the front lines. Even though you're under attack by this president, please understand this. We love you, we care about you, and this is your country. Now, when it comes to news, when it comes to media, when it comes to in front of the camera, behind the camera, please understand this. Many of us are fighting to make sure that we make a difference and make a change for the better. I happen to be the co-chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Task Force on Diversity, along with my colleague in the Senate, Senator Menendez. And together, we're making sure that we're fighting every single day, making sure that we're reminding all of these big media interests that we are not present and a difference needs to happen as soon as possible. And it takes one hire, one decision at a time. We respect the fact that these are big organizations and they have a lot of changes, but they've been leaving us out for far too long. And it's time that we see that Latinos are included in media, in journalism, and across the board. And remember, in front of the camera and behind the camera. Also, I'd like to make sure that people understand that many of us are fighting for, and you should be very proud, Latinos, that the bill to create a Latino museum on the National Mall for the first time ever made it out of the House of Representatives, and it was unanimous. That means every Republican, every Democrat, every member of the United States House of Representatives said, yes, I'm for a Latino museum. What a milestone. We are coming a long way, but we have a long way to go. And I also want to thank our leader in the Senate, Senator Menendez, who's carrying the Senate bill at this time, and he's making sure that they get it through the United States Senate. So again, we know how to work hard as Latinos, we know how to work smart, and we know how to work respectfully. And so we're doing our part in the United States Congress, not just Senator Menendez and myself, but all of the members of the Hispanic Caucus. I think it's important that we all understand that this time is unprecedented. We've seen an awareness in the United States of America that we haven't seen for over 60 years when it comes to civil rights, human rights. And at the tip of the spear, receiving the punishment from this administration is the Latino community and the immigrant community writ large. So please understand this. We need more Latinos in the media. We need more Latinos in every place saying, wait a minute, that's not the true story. This is the true story, so that everybody can see the truth and understand the truth and see what we're having to go through as American Latinos, as immigrant Latinos. Understand as well, the Pew Research Center analysis of the US Census Bureau data, say that the newsroom employees are vastly white and male. Again, it doesn't have to be that way. We have intelligent, amazing people who can be in those newsrooms. We have a talented, amazing people who can be the writers, be the producers. All we need is an opportunity, because let me tell you, we all know as Latinos, wherever we are, the work is getting done. Wherever we are, we work with our heart and our soul in everything that we do. It's going to be a beautiful day when we see more and more people who look like us in front of the camera and writing those stories and making sure that we're producing those projects, and you will see a better America. So I want to say once again, thank you. And to the panelists, we look forward to your comments and your expertise and educating us. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming together. And again, all of you who are attending this conference, muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much. Let's continue to be empowered and let's make a difference.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bienvenidos. Welcome. I'm Carlos Salcedo. I don't know if I should say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, since this is a virtual discussion. We have people from all over joining us here on the West Coast. It's still morning time, so good morning to those joining us. Broadcasting from KTLA 5 News, where I work as a general assignment reporter. I've been here for almost 2 years, reporting back in my hometown. So just grateful to be here, and grateful to CHCI, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, which is building the next generation of Latino leaders. I was a public policy fellow many years ago, the cohort of 2007, 2008. So it's been a while, but I remember my time with CHCI, sort of roaming the halls of Congress as a press fellow in the Senate Majority Leader's office, and then moving on to the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, there as a fellow. So I'm just very grateful for the work that CHCI has done and continues to do. And I do want to give a quick shout out to the current cohort of the graduate fellows. I know it must be difficult having to maneuver, the way things are with this pandemic. So just props to you, and definitely, just keep at it. So everyone's having to deal with this pandemic just the way we can, trying to survive. So I want to start now with the focus of the session to celebrate Latino voices in American journalism and media and discuss the ways our newsrooms and our boardrooms can encourage diversity on their staff and in storytelling. Of course, that's very important. With that, though, we do have a hashtag. So for those who are participating out there in the audience, a reminder to use the hashtag CHCIHHM20. And please submit your questions as well to the panel here. We will have time at the end for some Q&A. So there on your screen, there should be a panel that says Slido where you could actually submit your questions. With that said, we have an all-star panel that I want to introduce now. So without further ado, let's start with Stacy de Armas. She's Senior Vice President, Inclusive Insights and Initiatives, and a leader within Nielsen's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion practice. Stacy, good morning.
Good morning, Carlos. Thank you for having me. I am Senior Vice President.
Yes. Okay. Senior Vice President. Let me introduce the rest of our guests here.
Sure, of course.
He's an Emmy Award-winning journalist and anchor of ABC News World News Tonight weekend editions. And we also have with us Christy Habiger, Executive Vice President, Chief Enterprise Inclusion Officer, and Head of Marketing and Communications for Warner Media. So I want to welcome the three of you to our panel. So we will have an exciting discussion again on Latino voices in American journalism and media. Let's start with you, Stacy. I know this question is for everyone on the panel. Just if you could just introduce yourselves, what your current role is, be it as a media executive or as a journalist, and where you got your start. Oftentimes we tend just to focus on, what we're doing now, but not how we got our starts. I think that's important, an important discussion, especially for our younger generation, our students who are watching. So Stacy, take it away.
Of course, thank you. I am Stacy de Armas from Nielsen. I've been with Nielsen quite some time. I've been privileged to be part of Nielsen as we've evolved in the ecosystem of ensuring that we better represent Latinos and all diverse groups within our work. Today, as you mentioned, I focus on diverse insights and initiatives. So what that means is I have the responsibility of working with stakeholders, policymakers, brands, advertisers, and others, and helping them better understand the Latino community and all diverse communities from an analytics perspective, right? So from numbers perspective, what we represent in buying power, our strength, how we consume content, what's important to us, attitudes and behaviors. I'm honored to be part of this all-star panel, to be able to some of the new things that Nielsen is working on. We are painfully aware that the current media ecosystem doesn't reflect society today. And our CEO and Chief Diversity Officer, David Kenny, has ensured within Nielsen as an organization that we take this on as our responsibility. So later, when I have the opportunity, I'll be sharing one of our newest commitments that we think is groundbreaking when it comes to on-screen representation on content, both journalism and other produced content. So thank you for having me today.
All right, Stacy, thank you so much. Let's move on to Tom Llamas. Tom, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, Carlos. Well, very excited to be here today. My name is Tom Llamas. I'm the Chief National Affairs Correspondent for ABC News and the anchor of the weekend edition of World News Tonight. I started when I was 15 years old in Miami at Telemundo, Canal 51 in Hialeah, South Florida. I was so young that I would drive to work, and then my mom would have to take the car back because I only had a learner's permit. But that summer when I was 15, I answered phones, I went to breaking news, I helped out photographers, producers, reporters. And every summer after that, I worked in a newsroom, whether it be at Telemundo or ABC Eyewitness News in Miami. In New Orleans, I worked when I was in college. And little by little, I worked my way up the intern ladder. And I got my first job as an overnight production assistant at MSNBC. And it was a very, very tough schedule. And it was right around 9/11. And then when 9/11 happened, there was just a lot of work. But I had so much experience from starting out at such a young age that I was sort of thrust into all the TV producing and reporting that was going on at the time. And little by little, I worked my way up. I became a political producer, a campaign embed, and then a local reporter back in Miami, and then New York City. I started anchoring in New York City, and then eventually I went over to ABC News. I covered the 2016 campaign, and I started anchoring on the weekends, first Sunday, and then I took over the full weekends. And I cover big stories. I cover breaking stories. I had the opportunity to sit down and really question and press Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. I interviewed President Zelensky in Ukraine, Melania Trump, and I covered all the Republicans in 2016, including President Trump. And I'm excited to be here because I think this is a really important conversation we need to have. And I think it's a conversation we don't have enough and we don't speak up enough. And that's part of the problem. But I know we'll get there. So thanks for having me, Carlos.
Tom, thank you. You started off young too. I was a late bloomer in journalism. I didn't start till like when I was 25. So it's quite a while. All right, Christy Hoppinger, how about you? When did you get on? And just talk to us about your current role now.
Yeah, so I'm actually a Mexican-American native of Houston. I grew up in Texas. I went to UT Austin and got a super marketable degree in philosophy. So for any students who are concerned that they have the wrong degree or wrong major, I'm here to tell you it doesn't matter. I ended up going to law school, and while I was there, I went to law school at Stanford, and I wrote a business plan as part of a business class I was taking for a magazine idea for Latina Magazine, because the 1990 census had come out a few years prior, and the 1990 census, I don't know if you remember this, but like Time Magazine had a cover that said this is going to be the 90s were going to be the decade of the Hispanic, which apparently got rescheduled. And so I ended up starting a magazine, and I ran Latina Magazine for the first few years of its existence. I moved out to Los Angeles I was in New York then. I moved out to LA. I worked as a motion picture producer for a couple of years, most recently on a movie called Spanglish, which was my last film. I then worked at a talent agency. I ran the Latin business for CAA, a big talent agency, and represented folks like Salma Hayek and Eva Longoria and America Ferrera and Shakira, and had a fantastic time really working on trying to change the entertainment business, right, from the inside. And about a year ago, I agreed to join Warner Media, which is the parent company for Warner Brothers, HBO, CNN, TNT, TBS, Cartoon Network, all of that. And I joined as the head of diversity and inclusion about a year ago. And then about a month ago, I got another, I've been there almost a year, so I thought I was ready for a promotion. But I added to my responsibilities the head of communications and marketing for the corporation. So I am very typically Latina in that I'm working, a couple of jobs and really, really hard. But I feel like what we do matters, and the storytelling we do matters in our journalism, in our entertainment. And I feel like this is one of those moments for us where everyone's like, oh, there's 60 million of us, which is true, but demography is not destiny. And unless we take our power in this moment, I think we are going to miss out for a generation.
All right, Christy, thank you so much. I also want to introduce Ed O'Keefe now. He's a political correspondent for CBS News based in Washington, D.C., who's been covering the presidential election. So, Ed, you must be pretty busy right now.
It is, and apologies for the video issue, although CBS has a rich radio heritage, so maybe that's why you're just hearing my audio today. Forgive me for that. You get my cheesy headshot instead. When it comes to how I got to where I am, in essence, it started for me in middle school. I wrote a family newsletter for our family that had been spread out all across the country, and it was only because I stumbled upon the Microsoft Word newsletter template and started putting it together on a quarterly basis. I still can remember the mailing addresses of many of my great aunts and uncles because I would mail it to them each month. And that's when I caught the bug. And then from there in college, interned while I was studying abroad in London with a radio news service. That really made me realize that's what I want to do. Came back and had an internship with the website of the Washington Post, and then ended up spending 13 years after college there in a variety of roles, everything from a radio news writer for the radio channel we had, to a homepage editor, to a roving sort of VJ or one-man band during the 2008 cycle, when I would take the work of a lot of our newspaper reporters and try to put it on the video on the internet. Hosted a podcast that also ended up as an XM radio show, and eventually got into television to about 2.5 years ago here at CBS, and have covered the congressional and presidential election cycles, several big funerals, and the confirmation hearing of Brett Kavanaugh, and a lot of other moments along the way. And the one thing I continue to dwell on that's somewhat bittersweet is that at this level, there are very few Latinos doing this on a full-time basis in English for national news outlets, whether they're newspaper or television. I mean, Tom and I, his colleagues, Cecilia Vega, and very few others in television on the English side, at least. And in newspapers, when I was writing for the Washington Post covering Congress and presidential elections, you know, there was nobody else essentially left in print journalism who had covered national politics as a Latino. And I had dwelled on that with colleagues at times, saying that, you know, a lot of you who are Black or who are women or who are gay, you have somebody who's in the pipeline ahead of you. There really was no one who's Hispanic who was doing this before. And so, you know, it's daunting, it's distressing, it makes it a big challenge, and it puts an extra burden of responsibility on you when you realize that you are one of the very few. And thankfully, what I've noticed this cycle is that there is a crop of people coming up now who are covering national politics, and they aren't covering, you know, demographics or voters or the issues. They are covering the candidate and the story of the day. People like Laura Barón Lopez at Politico, Henry Gomez at BuzzFeed, Lisandra Villa at Time Magazine, Daniela Diaz at CNN, you know, and they are, you know, on the front pages, on the home pages, and on the various news programs discussing the campaign as a political reporter who happens to be Latino. And that is a sea change from the last several cycles, where you might have only seen the Latino come on when there was a discussion to be had about Florida politics or immigration, or how the candidates are finally turning their attention to the Latino vote. So it's something I'm conscious of. And coincidentally, Carlos, just last night, if anyone was watching the CBS Evening News or CBS This Morning today, what did we discuss but the fact that Joe Biden is struggling to earn support or enough support from Latinos in Florida, a problem that he acknowledged yesterday. It took a little while to remind people of this, but we were ready for it because this guy at least had been talking about it for several weeks in our newsroom. And it finally stuck with people that, yeah, this is a challenge and this is something we need to focus on. And we were ready for that even before Biden got there. So those are the kinds of challenges this guy faces, at least, but also is quite impressed by the fact that there are many more of us now than there used to be, even just 4 years ago.
All right, Ed, thank you. I'll ask you about that later on, but first, I want to bring up, you know, it's been mentioned, Latinos continue to be the fastest growing demographic in the country, and the demand for Latino-centric, Latino-specific media has grown. We've seen Spanish language and even bilingual offerings becoming part of the media landscape in film and TV, of course, entertainment. So, Stacey, what's been your experience with how companies are keeping up with the growing diversity, and is it enough?
Well, you know, I actually want to center back on what Christy said in her opening when she said demography isn't destiny, right? We are the fastest growing and we are the largest minority group, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the influence and the impact that we deserve. Now, we have significant influence, and we've seen year over year the increasing of Latino representation, storylines in media, in content, in newsrooms. Yet we still know that we are significantly underrepresented, and in particular in our smaller demographic groups. So when you think, for example, as Latinos, we're talking about like Latino women, mothers, and how we're represented also, right? It's more than just on-screen visibility. We're talking about cultural relevance, the right types of storylines, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, below the line talent and behind the camera is something we also want to take a closer look at. I'll tell you at Nielsen, we have been, you know, for a long time powering a lot of the data in the industry that comes out around around representation. So whether it's the Hollywood Diversity Report or it's other work being done by Annenberg, we have been partners in providing data that help source that. But we've also realized that we have a responsibility on our own to ensure that that data is readily available gratis to the industry, right? What representation on screen looks like and what that ends up meaning for content and for audiences. So we're stepping forward significantly in that role, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in fourth quarter, where aside from ratings and the things that you're typically used to looking at, we'll also be producing what we're calling inclusive analytics. So you can look by genre, by program, by network at what inclusion on screen looks like. And we think that's an incredible step, and it's going to be our gift to the industry. There is a significant challenge. I mean, none of us would be here if there wasn't. And I should have mentioned in my opening, I'm Latina, I'm first generation Cubana. I am a single mom with 2 kids. And so even for me, as I think about what my family's exposed to and the role that I play at my company in ensuring that we have a strong role in shifting and shaping that. So I'm proud to be here and participate. I have more to share about what Nielsen is doing. But again, I want to remind you, as Christy said before, and Christy, that was so strong, right? Demography doesn't just mean destiny. We have to align, pull together, and resource as one shared U.S. Latino community. And we can do that without minimizing or diminishing any of our unique individual cultures. We can come together and exert our power. And perhaps this is among the most important years of all of our lifetimes to do that between census and the upcoming election.
You mentioned Christy. So Christy, do you want to sort of piggyback on what Stacey was saying, or just add anything about the importance of diversity in storytelling?
Well, I mean, I can talk for hours about the importance of diversity in storytelling. I think I want to say something very quickly about this political moment and this political season. And one of the things that deeply, deeply concerns me is that we punch far below our weight class politically right now. There are 32 million adult Latinos who are eligible to vote. But for the last 20 years, in every election cycle, there have been more Latino non-voters, eligible non-voters, both some registered, some not. We have more eligible, non-voters than we've had participating voters. And what that means is that we don't begin to have the political muscle we do. And I think we also don't then have the sort of consumer muscle that we should, right? And I think about the fact that the media has impacted that, right? Media and entertainment shape what we think of ourselves and what we think of other people. In my business, in entertainment and in journalism, we tell the world what a hero looks like. I always think about the fact that there's 7 billion people on the planet, and most of them will never come to the United States, but they see our movies and our television, and we decide what a hero looks like, and we decide what a villain looks like. And so for all of those Americans who either don't see us or see a very narrow slice of us, it's really, really important that we correct that picture. So while changing our industry and the kinds of folks who get to tell our stories, I'm super proud of the fact that this year, 16% of Latino correspondents are 16% of CNN correspondents are now Latino, right? Like, it matters, not that we're just covering, Latino stories, but that we're covering the news, that is what a news gatherer looks like. That's what a reporter looks like, that's what an editor and a producer can look like, is really, really important. And I think it really matters. But politically speaking, I'm also working on a fantastic nonprofit with a number of organizers and friends, and it's called She Se Puede, because one of the biggest issues around Latinas voting in particular is that we don't have the confidence to believe that we can make a difference often in our lives, and certainly not in a political election, but we can. There actually are enough of us, and we're actually quite geographically concentrated still, so we could be the difference maker. And so with Eva and America and some of our compatriots, we've launched SheSePuede.org, and we are really working on giving Latinas the confidence and the information and the inspiration that they can make a difference this year and in this election. And we're working really, really hard to do that, because I think it's on all of us, right, to try and really claim our power in this moment.
Alrighty, and we've also seen a push for more diversity, as was mentioned in newsrooms, of course, but American newsrooms still remain largely white, with Latinos making up just 5% of the overall workforce. So, it goes beyond just the talent, right, or the people we see on the camera, but also behind the camera with writers, producers, editors. So, Tom, how is this impacting the communities that we represent? And have you seen a greater push for more inclusion given the racial unrest that we're seeing, that we're covering in America?
Look, I think we've come a long way, but we still have a very long way to go. At ABC News, we've done a very, very good job, I think, in front of the camera as far as Latino representation, minority representation goes. I've anchored newscasts where I've tossed to Cecilia Vega, Alex Perez, Victor Oquendo, and Gio Benitez in a single newscast. Doesn't happen all the time, but it's happened before, and that's pretty monumental. That being said, what we're working on right now is trying to get more diversity behind the camera, and not only at the associate producer and producer level, but at management levels, because that is where the power lies. As we all know, we need to have people of color in management positions, because then it can trickle down, right? I think the lack of diversity in a newsroom means that the newsroom is incomplete. What do I mean by that? I mean, when you attack a story, when you cover a story, whether it be a presidential campaign or something like immigration, if you don't have a diverse staff, a diverse team of reporters and producers, you're going to have an incomplete story. When I go to the border and I cover immigration and I run into an undocumented immigrant like I have before in families, if I didn't speak Spanish, the story that I'm going to get is only going to be from the Border Patrol agent. We're going to tell that side of the story. But since I can speak Spanish, I can communicate with that family, with that mother, and she can tell me what she's running from, right? So if I didn't speak Spanish, we only get half the story. When you go to speak, and anybody who's done news on this panel knows that when you go to interview someone, immediately when you can make a connection with someone, it's gonna break open the interview and they're gonna share more. People always ask, what's the language of business? And the answer is the language of the customer. And when you're trying to get a story, that customer is the person you're trying to interview, your viewers. And as soon as you can connect to them on a personal level, you're going to get more of their story. Ed and I were on the campaign trail 4 years ago, and I was watching Donald Trump do an interview with Bill O'Reilly. And in this interview, he used the term anchor baby like maybe 7 times in 2 sentences. And I knew what anchor baby was, but I looked it up because I said, it sounds like such an ugly phrase. Let me find out where it came from. And the first thing that came up was it was like Webster's, or I can't remember which dictionary I went to, but it basically says it was an offensive term. And I remember seeing the word offensive in the definition. And so I questioned when Trump was a candidate, President Trump was a candidate, about this, and we got into kind of a back and forth, and it became a thing, right? It became a thing where not only in our newsrooms, there was a discussion like whether it was an offensive term or not. And it was funny because if you were not an immigrant, or if you were not from an immigrant family, my parents are both Cuban, it was kind of like, oh, is it really offensive? Is it not offensive? This is 4 years ago. Now, there's no question it's an offensive term. But 4 years ago, it was like, is it offensive? Is it not offensive? But because there were minority journalists on the campaign trail asking these questions, it became a part of the conversation, and it led to some education, which is very important, which we not only inform, we try to inspire, we need to educate sometimes too. And I think Carlos, when you have like a diverse newsroom, I think those things happen organically, right? We're not advocates. That's not what I'm saying. I believe in objective journalism, but I do believe in telling complete stories, and that only happens when you have diverse newsrooms.
I agree with that. I agree also just when you're out on a story, at a scene, people, other Latinos, they see another Hispanic face, they feel comfortable, and they want to go up to you, and they give you the interview just because, they see themselves in you. They see themselves in the communities we represent. So of course, that's an important issue. Ed, what's been your experience? And you kind of alluded to it earlier, just, as working in newspapers and now in TV. And just how has that how does it impact storytelling or just the way we pitch stories as well?
Yeah, I'd associate myself with, I think, just about everything Tom said, especially at CBS, the idea that we are in great shape, or in improving shape, certainly, in front of the camera with people like today, Manny Bajorquez, who's down dealing with the hurricane, myself covering the campaign, Adriana Diaz in Chicago, and Lilia Luciano and others covering the wildfires out west. In front of the camera, we're in great shape. Behind the camera, in the decision-making positions, in the story-making process, we're working on it, and but we're getting there. We had a really good experience this summer where we all banded together, those of us who are Latino, to produce an hour-long documentary that looked at the disproportionate effect of this pandemic on the Latino community across the country. It involved Maria Elena Salinas talking to people in Miami. She's a CBS contributor and led the project. I went to New York to talk to an assemblywoman who's converted her district office into a food and diaper pantry for her constituents. Others spoke with business leaders and immigrant workers and medical people who had been affected by this or whose own immigration status was at risk even as they sought help. And it's something that CBS had never done. And it was acknowledged throughout that we're going to have to find ways to do this again and again when it makes sense, not to force the issue, but to speak up collectively and say, look, if there's something that's disproportionately affecting our community, we got to make sure that it's being covered properly. And it's a commitment that we're making to keep going into the future. But to Tom's point about 4 years ago, I actually haven't spent enough time this year dwelling on it, but it was a lonely and somewhat painful experience to have to be the one sort of badgering colleagues to realize that what Donald Trump was saying was not right, was offensive, was incorrect, and was something so unprecedented and out of the norm that it deserved to be called out. And it took too long for news outlets to acknowledge that. And in part, that was because there weren't enough of us out there asking his competitors what they thought of it. There weren't enough of us in newsrooms speaking up and saying, hey guys, this may be Donald Trump being Donald Trump, but we've never really had a presidential candidate, at least not in modern times, doing and saying things like this. We need to call that out. And, you know, it still gives me pangs in my chest thinking about it, because that was when I began to realize, there are very few of us who cover politics at this level and who had this understanding. And to this day, we still have to remind people sometimes, or you see it from colleagues, not necessarily where I work, but in other places. You can see it in the writing, you can see it in the coverage, and you have to sort of stop and say, can you believe that that is still a problem? And some of the basic facts that the president exposes, that people later acknowledge they didn't realize either, like what Puerto Rico actually is and its relationship with the United States. So there's still a lot of educating that has to go on. And as everyone who's here knows, and who I'm sure everyone who's watching or listening knows, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to have to keep doing it, but we have to do it because the story won't properly be told until we do. And the challenge is to not get pinned, as Tom was saying, as an advocate. And it's because I align myself with that. I am a journalist, period. Not an advocate, not here to advocate a position or for a group of people, but a journalist who's presenting fair and accurate reporting. And part of that is saying and understanding the perspectives of the people who are being talked about or who would be led by somebody, and making sure that that person knows it and calling it out when it might be adversarial or run counter to the interests and the needs of those people. And, in this day and age, it is tricky because there are a lot of people out there who want to ping you right away for being an advocate or being biased in your approach to this. But in reality, it's just presenting all perspectives as well as you can, and calling out uncomfortable things for people when necessary.
I want to add.
Yeah, I think we have a lot more work. So Stacey, you need to get going, or you want to add something?
I want to add something, and I think Christian and I are over here feeling the same things too, because what Tom suggested and also what Ed suggested, there's two things. When you said, Tom, that it's an incomplete story, right? If we don't have Latinos represented, I was looking at Christy thinking she is feeling this as well when she thinks about content, writers' room, producers, even below the line talent. You're not getting the representation when you don't the subtleties within the content when you don't have representation within the ranks. It's the same. It's really the same that you see in journalism. We see the same thing in content as we see in boardrooms. And that's why that is so important. And I know you want to comment on that, Christy. I want to add one thing that, well, actually, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think one of the things that we've come at this conversation a lot of times from like a social justice point of view. And I think it's also really because, yes, we do deserve to be in the room and we have a right to be in that room, right? But when we have a Javi Morgado, as the executive producer on New Day, it's not, or Ramon Escobar running talent, and all of the Latinos that I know, at CNN, right, make a difference. But the other thing that's really important is actually not just the social justice of it, not just because we're going to do incomplete stories without us in the room, but also that we bring innovation. And our business right now, when we have 500, or I don't know, I'm sure Stacey can confirm this, what feels like a zillion media choices, we can't keep telling and showing the stories in the same way. And so McKinsey and lots of academics have proven this, that like new inputs drive innovation. And our voices in the room actually become catalysts for not just sort of inclusion, but really innovation in our storytelling. And I think that when we're talking to companies about why this is, the fact that it impacts the business, it's good for our community, but it's actually really good for our business. And I think framing it that way has made a meaningful difference for folks. We've seen this in ratings. We've seen this in movie success. We've seen that more inclusive storytelling outperforms very homogenous storytelling. We've seen that innovative storytelling outperforms, the same old, same old. We just got too many choices now. So if I show people something that they've seen before, I'm not going to win. And you know what? I want to win.
All right, I do want to go back to Ed's point from earlier. We are just 47 days away now from the presidential election, and we're seeing both campaigns, courting the critical Latino vote. You've been covering the campaigns, Ed. What have you noticed? Is the Latino vote in play?
Is the Latino vote what?
In play.
There is nothing to suggest that Joe Biden will win a majority of Latino voters. The question is, how much of his advantage can the president eat into in, I would argue, at least three key battleground states: Arizona, Florida, and Nevada. He has, to his credit, and I mean that to his credit, has focused on trying to siphon off a significant enough percentage, especially in Florida, a state that he knows he has to win, by targeting a very narrow bit of our diaspora: conservative, socialist hating, socially conservative, church-going Latinos in South Florida, along the I-95 corridor, and in Central Florida. And it's working to some extent if you believe some of the polling, but other polling suggests that Biden will blow him away. The magic number usually is that Biden's going to have to get north of 60% in Florida, plus do well among seniors and white voters in order to win that state narrowly. In Arizona, our recent polling suggests that he's winning Hispanics by a wide margin, on par or a little better than Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago, and that's good. And that'll contribute to his potential victory there. But in Nevada, there's some signs that among younger and especially male Latinos, Biden is struggling to earn the support that Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago, in part, again, because the president appeals to a certain subsection of Hispanics. And I know, because I've heard it, that there are some of you who are scratching your heads and wondering how that could be. But it is a reminder, and I think sometimes we are the ones that need to be reminded most of all, that Latinos are not a monolith. And I talked to a pollster yesterday who's done extensive work in Nevada and Florida, especially among Latinos. And she said, look, part of it is, believe it or not, there are a lot of Latinos who don't know who Joe Biden is, other than the fact that he was essentially the president's wingman as his vice president for 8 years. They don't know that he did all his work in the Senate on foreign policy, that he pushed for the Violence Against Women Act. Yes, that he was the lead sponsor of the 1994 crime bill, that he worked on the Affordable Care Act and on the stimulus plan and everything else. And they like the general gist of the president, a successful business guy who does and says whatever he wants and, you know, in their view, is successful. So, you know, this pollster said the Biden campaign can do it, probably will prevail, but has to be presenting our community with more than just, I'm not President Trump. And that transcends Latinos to African Americans, to women, to college educated and non-college educated voters of whatever color or stripe. So again, no reason to think that a majority won't support Biden, but watch how much the president can eat into that advantage, especially in those 3 key states.
All right. And Stacey, I believe you have to go unless, is there a final thought that you want to add before you have to head out?
I wanted to thank you for the opportunity. I want to remind everyone to please keep their eyes open for Nielsen in this space. We believe it's our responsibility to help diversify the media ecosystem, and that's for journalism and content. And I'm honored to have been here. I'm sorry I have to go, but I'm leaving you in very, very capable hands. So gracias todos.
All right. Thank you, Stacey. I do want to move on now to the Q&A session. We have a number of people that have submitted questions. Tom, one question from Annette says, the majority of Latino focused news stories focus on immigration stories. What is the media doing to represent non-immigrant Latinos?
Right. It's actually a great question. And I could almost bolster that question and say, sometimes the media only shows up to immigration stories when someone dies or when a child dies. And if you raise that question, you'd actually have a point because it's true. How do you change that? You change that by when you do a story, like if you do a political story about the race in Florida, you make sure you hear from a Latino voice, right? You make sure that. When you cover any story, whether it be social unrest in the city, or if it was right now we're covering 2 hurricanes, right? So we're covering. We know the hurricanes are coming. Did you hear from a Hispanic family what they were going through? One of the reasons why COVID has hit Hispanics so hard is because they live in multi-generational homes, right? So abuela lives there and tia lives there, and then it's the immediate family. So there's a lot of relatives under one roof, and that's a very compelling story in itself. So it's just a constant reminder of thinking, okay, when I go out and attack a story and I'm going to interview a community, what is the breakdown of this community? If it's a majority Hispanic, shouldn't I be interviewing somebody who's actually Hispanic to get their perspective? And you may think that's textbook, they should do that. But a lot of times, truth be told, you're running to a story, you have a very short amount of time to make your deadline, and you're trying to put the story together as fast as you can. Not always, but it happens. But sometimes you need to slow down and say, wait a minute, are we really telling the story correctly? Are we hearing from all the voices we need to? And a lot of that comes just from training, but making sure you have conversations like this as reminders, because people forget. Right now, race and justice is at the top of our minds, but I've also seen our society forget very quickly. And I just hope this moment right now is not forgotten.
I want to, we at CNN, we just launched a Race Beat, which is a group of folks who are covering not only, will break news, but are going to cover the stories and the conversations around race and all the different dimensions. I read something that I was so fascinated by that I realized that no one had covered. Time's Up issued a study recently around the impact of COVID on different groups of women, right? Latinas were more likely than any other group to have cried themselves to sleep at least once since March. And I thought, gosh, that's when you sort of understand the dimension of it, because you're right, Tom, like we not only are we more likely to have multi-generational living, but we also are the front lines, right? We are the front lines. We are those retail workers. We are those delivery folks. We are working in the hospitals. And I think I realized that I was yearning for that as a consumer, that I hadn't seen that sort of that dimensionalized emotional, like what is it like for that family? And again, that just reminds us of why, we need to be in the decision making around not just who is covered, but how we cover it.
Carlos, just to follow up on that point, there's multiple reasons why COVID hit the Black and Hispanic communities a lot. As we mentioned, multi-generational, frontline workers, jobs where you're working right next to each other. Another thing that struck me when we were looking at the research of why this happened to Hispanic families so much, it was lack of information. There were local leaders across this country that they don't do interviews in Spanish. Or they won't put out any type of message in Spanish with a translator. Can you imagine that this day and age where you have a significant population that speaks Spanish, you need to get to them current and important information in pandemic, and that right there is not even being done. I mean, it's so upsetting when you think that can still happen in this day and age.
Okay. Ed, do you have something you want to add to that?
Honestly, in the interest of more questions, why don't we just move on?
Okay. Well, there's one more question I want to get in really briefly, and this one was for Christy. It's specific. This is from Sarah. What is Warner Media doing to increase representation behind the camera and in your programming?
Yeah, so when I started, one of the first things that I got to do was issue a first for the industry, which was a diversity and inclusion report that we published last year and laid out all of our numbers. And I did this because I hope that our industry decides to get to the level of transparency and accountability that I think a lot of other industries take for granted. And, historically, our business has not, shown their numbers as readily. So I think the first step is transparency and accountability. So we've made some changes in the last year that are involving accountability and frankly tying managers' compensation to achievements on diversity and inclusion, which are a meaningful component now of your performance review. We've also done a lot in how we invest in pipeline programs. I have a woman on my team who leads all of our pipeline programs, everything from, PAs to writers' rooms. One of the things that I will say that has been a huge shift is that I feel like a lot of that work has lived in kind of a philanthropic or community or, social responsibility bucket. And I'm trying to change the mindset and the mind frame around this to, no, this is actually a critical, essential part of our business. I feel like if you ask most CEOs, is diversity an important, critical priority? They would say yes. And then if you say, well, what is your plan to achieve that? They would say, well, we're going to try and do a bit better. Well, if I were in any other job, if I were in distribution and our goal was to sort of.
Alrighty, I think we're all back. Sorry for that little glitch, but I think we only have time now for closing remarks. I only see Tom Llamas with me, so hopefully we could get Christy and back. But Tom, any final thoughts you want to add just as far as from this panel discussion or a point that you want to get across?
Well, first, I just want to thank you, Carlos, for having me and for everybody who put this together and the colleagues that I'm on this panel with, because a lot of people here I respect. And I'm meeting new people as well. And Christy and Stacy, it's great to speak with them. The only thing I'd leave everyone here with is that remember that somebody at some point in your career helped you. So not to forget to help somebody else. It's really easy to sort of think about your career and little by little work your way up the ladder. And sort of forget how you got there. You did get there on your own merit. You did get there because of your hard work, but someone along the way maybe helped you. I know for me, along the way, a lot of Hispanics helped me, right? I had some great Hispanic mentors. I had a lot of great Black mentors. I was thinking about this the other day. In fact, probably 95% of the people who've mentored me in this industry have been people of color. And I say that because we need to help each other. And when we help each other grow, and then we grow in numbers. And that's really where the power's at. We talked about getting people up into management roles, and hopefully that can trickle down. We want to make sure we also have people in all roles, in newsrooms and entertainment, wherever we're talking about in the media. So the last thing I would say is, even if you're at the bottom of the ladder, even if you're the intern who's just walked in a month or two, there's going to be a new intern. And just make sure you're extending a hand out to that person, because somebody obviously helped you and someone may be helping you at that moment. But just not to forget where you came from and make sure you're trying to lift up the next generation.
Yeah, it's definitely about paying it forward, helping those, or looking back, at the mentors that help you, and then passing that along. Christy, we are just taking final thoughts. Anything you want to get across with the final minutes we have here?
Yeah, I think, listen, I think that we are at a critical point. I think that first of all, I love what Tom said, and I so much believe in that. I stand on the shoulders of so many people to be here. And in addition to that, I think, we have to allocate the resources of the opportunities that those of us fortunate who have the privileges we do in the rooms we have to do something impactful with that privilege. I always think about the fact that, according to the census, many years from now, our grandchildren are going to look back and ask us, what was it like back when you were a minority? Like, what was that like? And I think we have to be ready to answer that. Here's what I did to make it better, right? Here's who I registered to vote. Here's the stories that I helped us tell. Here's how I really reminded America of our humanity. Like, what we do in our businesses matters so much. And so we can't doubt that. And I hope that everyone takes that to heart and does something with impact.
All right, Christy, thank you. So that is all the time we have. So I want to thank the panelists, Christy, Tom, Ed, as well as Stacy. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope this was an informative discussion and that we take the conversation back into the newsroom, the boardrooms, and just continue that conversation about the importance of diversity in storytelling, but also just behind the cameras. That's very critical as far as having a great working environment with people who we pitch stories to, with our editors, and that we get more representation, and that it's reflected, from not just from the communities that we come from, but we see that in mainstream media. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great day.